Miss Lori Nelson, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm
Uh,
hanging tough.
uh,
Hanging tough.
awesome.
Hmm.
Thank you so much for joining me today in my passion project, Panic and Patience. Um,
Hmm.
this platform is really to give the community leaders, those who I consider change agents, those who are making a difference in our community, to give them a platform to be able to express themselves and to share sort of their journey and what they're doing to build community. And I see you as a leader, I see you as a change agent, and every time that I've interacted with you, it's funny, you remind me so much of sort of the women in my tribe in growing up, the women who are nurturing, the women who will tell you about yourself, the women who will love you, the women who will check you. All of those things I think are important, particularly in my life, were important because it gave me a sense of pride, a sense of understanding of the importance of Black women, and
Hmm.
and sort of put me on a path to understand that there's always two perspectives to how we move in the world. There's those
Hmm.
who you got your uncles and your granddaddy them and the men in the neighborhood, and then you have the women who sort of build and nurture the community. And so I'm so excited to talk to you because I know that you've done so much work in your community. You've opened your arms to so many people, and I really just want to have this conversation with you, so folks who don't know you can get a chance to hear about the
Hmm.
amazing work that you're doing. So thank you so much for your time and your willingness to participate today.
Well, I mean, you're Jay Williams, so you can't say no to Brother Jay. So I'm very happy to be here and to share whatever I can share. But really, I just want to take this time to applaud your work. I mean, you are really moving the needle forward in spaces and places where we need Black leadership and we need Black men to lead, and Black women. But certainly, you've been doing it. So I'm just happy to be part of your tribe, sir. So we're good. We're good. Hmm.
Dope, dope.
Hmm.
So what I love to do is to start my conversation off by asking my guests to tell me a story. It could be about anything, but what story do you have for me today?
So I guess it's funny because I try to share how I started this work. That's always my story with people, and
Mhm.
it's very different from what people would think. So um, I used to work for Radio One, and I worked at, look at you smiling already. Yep, and I worked as a senior lifestyle account manager. So I handled every major concert, every major record release, CD release, every major lifestyle or brand account. So, for example, I'm about to date myself and make you laugh, right? So, one of my largest clients back in the day, combination of Def Jam and Interscope, right? So, when Interscope came out, they were trying to do a branch. I'm gonna use Interscope as an example. And Interscope had branched into lifestyle, that being luxury and leisure. And one of those was to brand or to market a cigar called Zeno Platinum. So Interscope launches, Zeno Platinum cigars, and I had to do a tour. At that time, Russ Parr and Tom Joyner were the host, Northeast region for Radio One. So I had to do an entire tour with them as they promoted not only Interscope, but also Zeno Platinum cigars. So I said that to say, how does that then get you into anything political, right?
Right, right.
So I had worked with Radio One for around, wow, maybe 4 years, and I really think, really, Jay, from a space, I always try to center myself self in the work that we do around God. You know this about me, right? So like
Mhm.
what I started to realize as my journey was evolving on the Christianity space, right? And Christendom, that it was conflicting with some of the work that I was doing at Radio One. And so I had to make a decision, right? Because here I am. At that time, I was really into youth and young adult ministry, and so I'm trying to like teach youth and young adults about lifestyle choices, right? About making good choices, about like, praying, seeking God. But I'm promoting like platinum cigars. I'm promoting Steve Rock. I'm promoting all these things that that kind of contradict that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Everything in moderation, but certainly it was very interesting. So it became a pivotal point where it started to get at me, like literally internally. I was like, yo, I can't do this. I can't. I mean, it was very beneficial. I would argue in my career path, went to Northeastern, uh, English literature is my major, African American studies is my minor. I will promise you that it was one of the most interesting spaces in my career because it's also the place where I made the most money. So, so it was a big toss, right? Because we were commission based. So I had all the major record labels. Name them, Jay. You're a music head, right? Name
Right.
every label that you can think of that was under my wheelhouse. And so on average, and this is not to brag or boast, my commission checks would be up of 10 grand or more. Right. And so I really was fortunate and blessed, you know, to work with some of the best of them that we even know to this day. And it was beneficial, but at the same time, it began to eat at me on the inside, right? Because of what I felt that and continue to feel that I'm called and convicted to do. So the short of the story was, it was just about recognizing, you know, your bigger calling, right? So again, I had to sever ties with Radio One. It was painful because at one point I was really digging the money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And being able to provide for people and do what you do. And then I started this career path of politics. I was tapped by former state rep Marie St. Fleur and a few others at the time who were like leaders of the Black Caucus. And the Black Caucus was looking for an executive director. And that's how we started this. But that's my crazy story, just so you know.
Wow, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
and so now that you're in politics, how much is the hustle of the music business and the radio business and, you know, sales and commission and networking and all those things, how is that, you know, influence the work that you do now or your style of navigating politics now?
I think the central piece for that was the understanding of Black people in our unique way that we communicate, right? And so it
Mm.
sounds crazy, right? But like bringing the thread forward, right? Like what I recognize is that communication is so key for us. So whether we're in politics or whatever space in life that we are in or occupy, right? Whatever industry, whatever occupation, what's key for Black people is this way that we communicate, whether it be music, whether it be at the time, even pulling off of what I did in radio, the whole marketing strategy of how we really get messages that get to the heart and soul of who we are, right? So how do I make sure that Jay and his fam, you know, hear the message the same way that other consumers would, right? And so that's the factor that is carried throughout. So even in politics and even in the work that we do now, you know, the whole concept of how do we ensure that that message is getting to those who we serve, right? Those who we know need to hear it in such a way where they will be moved, or there will either be, you know, a way that they totally understand what we're trying to do and how we try to move forward. And quite candidly, the biggest piece is messaging that informs, that educates, and uplifts our people. You feel me? So all of that has been it really has never left me. It's what you've heard me say this, Jay, like messaging is key for me. And that was what I took from radio.
Mm-hmm. And so how have you now, you know, you obviously have relationships in the music business and then, you know, you work in politics. Now, how have you built community in your journey thus far? Was it more so just build a community through your networks, just the people that you know and you've worked with, or have you done it more on a grassroots end where, you know, supporting and growing organizations that are for a specific cause?
I think it's a both and, you know, it's been a combination of sorts. You know, there's some spaces where you rely on what you've been able to bring to the table, whatever your brand is, whatever that looks like, that can help really uplift. The whole thing for me is the upliftment of our people. The whole thing for me is the encouragement and advancement of our people. Stems from the roots of the NAACP again in civil rights space, where the collective agenda has always been about how we move Blackness forward, if you will, right? What does that agenda look like? And so I've been really blessed, Jay. Like I've been pulled into projects where we've been, we've dealt with Corey reform. So when I was under the leadership of, he's a bad boy, Ron Bell and others, and under Governor Patrick's administration, right? The goal was to figure out how we really, begin to not only talk about Corey, but also look at Corey in a way that people understand that it's not a negative stigma, right? That we got to figure out how even people who have Corys are still valued, right? They're still part of our society. They're still part of our community. And how do we not only support, but push and move them and move us forward as a community, even, to make sure that everybody gets what they need. For me, it's always a balance of making sure that everyone gets a chance to eat at the table. It's always about access and opportunity. So, and I can do like this whole name drop of people who have influenced me. And, and that would be a long list because I lean from community and how I understood the sense of community, again, from an organizational standpoint, like the NAACP and other spaces, but then also, quite candidly, Jay, from the church. So it was always a combo of the church and civil rights in my early days in radio that helped me to understand how important our community is, and certainly how we ensure that our community gets what other people get regularly. So again, it's always going to be about access and opportunity and ways to support and promote each other, right? Because if we do it in the way that I think I've watched and witnessed through some real, like, community builders, not only in the city of Boston, but beyond, it really leads to our entire agenda moving forward.
Mm. Yeah. And so I want to know your thoughts on this. The church, and if we look at the current political and cultural climate, Black Lives Matter, racism, justice with police, and all the different systemic issues that we're seeing, how has the church, as of late, the church as a whole, maybe not necessarily your specific church, but church as a whole, how have you seen their support in these movements? Because it seems that back in the civil rights era with Dr. Martin Luther King and such, the church was it was so visible. It was clear. I mean, his name was Reverend Doctor, right? And so, people immediately connected the faith-based community to his work. I'm not sure that I see that on the forefront, but I could just be missing it. What is that? What is your thoughts on that? Is that something that has sort of been more behind the scenes in the modern movement, or it just looks different now that we are in this fast-paced sort of social media environment where things are moving like this? We don't necessarily have a faith-based leader running the particular movement, but there's still a lot of work behind the scenes happening. What's your thoughts on that?
So I think it does look a little different. I think as we see the as we see the civil rights movement, as it unfolds and as we look at it from a historical standpoint and even a reference point, to your point, Reverend Dr. King, right? So a lot of the organizing, right? A lot of the meetings, because you had to have the meetings in safe spaces and secret places, right? The strategic planning sessions, the prayer meetings, the let's cook food for people. All of these things that were at very crucial parts of the movement are different now, right? So let's also add into it, we're in a dual pandemic. So whereas the church has always been considered the refuge in Black community, you can't go to a physical church now, Jay. Right? You can't go to the building to do what we just named, right? So what we have churches who I think have played prominent roles in some of their communities that they are centered in, but it certainly isn't the universal kind of like clarion cry for the Black church to come together as one, regardless of denomination, related to these dual pandemics. What I can say though, is that you have individual churches and individual faith leaders who have stepped up and are really doing work. And that work is is most prominent behind the scenes, right? So again, I go to this space of a dual pandemic where we've had clergy come together to peacefully march and protest, but then pray, right? In the beginning stages of what we saw as racial unrest, right? Um, um, you know, at police headquarters here in Boston, right? So we saw where we had different clergy leaders come together that came in unity, and it was for the cause of uh, supporting the fact that, of course, Black Lives Matter, but secondly, to try to teach and educate by way of prayer and peaceful protest that police should look at a different way to deal with reform, right? So that's a demonstration of modern day type of movement that was kind of elevated from what we see as our history. Then you had individual faith leaders who really have become almost spokespersons within their own ranking file based on uh, certain parts of this space we are in the movement, right? So you've seen some who have been more vocal around housing, right? You've seen some who've been more vocal around food and those resources that come with food and supply. You've seen those who have actually taken the social justice mantle by way of dealing with policy and reform. But it's not as unified as it used to be, right, Jay? But it doesn't take away from the work still being done. I think where we are as a people is there's this like interesting crossroad, right? So we have what we have known to be our historical history, that picture and the time called the civil rights movement. There's some who would argue that some of the ways and philosophies that the Martins and the Reverend Vivians and our late Congressman Lewis did their work is some of the way that we should adopt and do it now. There are others that would argue that we need to figure out a new norm, right? This is a new time. We're in this pandemic. It's a new way of life. So how do we move it forward? I submit to you that I think it's a both and. I certainly would suggest that there's some spaces and places in history that we always lean from and grow from. I also think to the extent that the era that we're in, quite candidly, Jay, some people don't trust the Black church anymore. Let's just call the cards. So whereas the church was this like the center, right? This is where you got everything that you needed because of different reasons that has to deal with healing, right? And restoration of our people. People don't necessarily see that anymore. And so you'll see pockets, to answer your question, of church and that Black church experience emerge in the movement. But I think there's a deeper place where we have to do a healing type of thing, if that answers your question.
No, it does. And what do you think, maybe just sort of like bird's eye view, you talked about unity in the movement, you know, as it relates to the faith-based community and such. Why is that? Why do you think there is a lack of, or it has shifted? Is it because of the perception of the Black church in the modern times, or do you think it's more internal with how they are strategically maneuvering through this political landscape? Now, it's better to do it behind the scenes in pockets than it is to come out on the forefront as one. What do you think about that?
So I think it's a both and, honestly. Okay. I think there's some people, you know, and I've had this privilege of serving in leadership with the Black Ministerial Alliance and working with a host of pastors, not only in the city of Boston, but beyond. And even with my work with Governor Patrick, working with a lot of faith-based organizations and leaders, both regionally and nationally, what I found is that, you know, the church has to do some internal work, right? And so part of that internal work comes with a recognition of the value of the Black church, and then recognizing from its history until now how the Black church has served and has led in spaces. But I would also submit to you, again, I'll go back to this, Jay, that for whatever reason, whatever happened in the history of the church where leaders or those who were, or at least deemed leaders, something happened where trust factor shifted. So the whole trust factor and how leaders of churches, not all, so we don't do a generalization, but, you know, there's some question there. The third piece is, you know, what we found is that some people had more personal self-promoting motives versus the unifying motive of us coming together as a people and moving an agenda forward, right? And so even in today's modern day of what we're calling the movement, you know, Jay, if we were in a different conversation, you and I, and we're hanging out with some clergy leaders, and all are good people, I'm not knocking them, but they would have different perspectives of different persons who are supposed to be co-laborers in that, in their vineyard with them. You know, some would say, oh, brother such and such or pastor such and such has this, that, or the third ulterior motive, right? Someone would say this other person. So when you hear those pockets, you also still go to rather the space and place of a need of a universal type of deep root type of healing and mending, right? Because our national stage would suggest that we to some extent must be unified, right? The other part of the movement was real simple, Jay. I mean, people didn't always get along. It's why you had these different parts of the movement, and even the spin-offs, as in people broke away from the overarching civil rights movement because they had different ideologies, and that is fine. But even when there would be differences, right? There was this unifying factor of us coming together to move the agenda forward. What I think I'm seeing now is that I think that still exists, but there's a lot of repair that has to be done. I guess that's the best way to put it. Yeah.
And have you ever felt in your work that you, because of you work in politics, you have jeopardized, you had the potential to jeopardize your own sort of spiritual or faith-based, you know, initiatives or thoughts or perspectives because of the work that you had to do from a political standpoint? Because sometimes people are, you know, when you think of politics, people are kind of like, you know, I don't, because you left an industry because it was jeopardizing your spiritual connection, you know, that you were sort of nurturing and growing at that season in your life. Now it's almost like you went from sort of the public sector, right, and just we're doing working with music and radio, and then you went to politics, and someone argued that's not much of a difference, you know, depending on who you're asking and how it's being looked at, depending on the communities that are being served or not being served. Right? It's just like, you know, so how have you maneuvered that aspect, you know, and to yourself, not necessarily the answer to him, but to yourself?
So I think it was a combination of sorts as I began to mature and realize that, you know, every part of your life has a purpose, right? And so, you know, what I call in the earlier chapters, right? Radio served a purpose, and it helped me to understand what I think I've mentioned, that there's something to be said about a universal language of communication or messaging that actually brings our people forward. And for me, I always felt that that was really a spiritual matter, the whole concept of ensuring that all people have a voice, right? That the just and righteousness part of what you know, what God would say is the best way to move things forward, right? It's how I look at it. And so as I use that as the guidepost, when I came into politics, it's how I deal with things. You know, the reality for me, this is really a justice thing. It's really about justice and righteousness for God's children. And so so when I recognized that I could pull upon what I had learned, the good, bad, and ugly about the radio industry, that is also quite political. Right now that I think back, right, on the negotiations on who gets what and how you serve and how you market and how you message, you know, it really lends to where we are now, right? And so for me, the personal journey has been one of embracing what that has looked like for me, you know. And so whereas earlier I was a little more critical of the fact that, oh my gosh, you know, it's hard for me to do this, and my conviction was such that it contradicted serving and meeting the needs of young people and young adults. I realize now that this was all part of a journey to get me to this place, because we now deal with, you know, all walks of life who have different interests and different ways that they look at politics. And my goal and my purpose in this work is to ensure, again, basic principle. Everybody gets a chance to not only sit at the table, but to eat at the table. And that has been something that's been transferred from radio until now. So I don't see it as anything too much different. The learning lesson for me, and it was a good lesson, was that I couldn't let things get too I don't know how to put it. I couldn't allow other things to kind of serve as a guide for me. So there it is. So the real lesson for me, Jay, at one point I think I mentioned to you, I made a lot of money in radio. And so there was one point where I was driven by the money, right? Versus what I knew in my heart was part of the very interesting way of a calling, right? To really deal with hearing the people and community and trying to relay that message so that the people and community got what they needed, even under the umbrella of radio, right? That would mean that we were meeting their needs as it relates to what they wanted to hear and what they wanted to see about around the only Black radio entity in town at that point, like national, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then number two, making sure that we were able to deliver to them by way of working with, record labels or industry moguls, right? Like, how do we ensure that we give back, right? And so that's never changed. But I will say, for me, at one point, there was a glamour to it. And I'm not a starstruck type of girl. I've never been that type of woman, rather. But there was a time when the money piece got heavy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so now I shifted to where we are as public servants. The goal of a public servant is to do just that, serve the people. You're supposed to serve people because you have a heart for the people. That's how I look at public service. I've always looked at it that way, and public servitude as to be a public servant, right? And so that's how I've been able to mature in this, to realize that it really isn't about the money. It's about how we ensure that everyone gets to eat at the table, or we make spaces for people to create their own tables, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to ensure that voices are heard at these tables, and again, that everybody gets their equal share. And I feel like I'm talking a lot, but yeah, I hope it makes sense.
No, I love it. I'm sort of absorbing it all. How important has family been in your journey to get into politics? Because we've had some offline conversations about sort of the history and the lineage that you have, in doing this work and serving your community. So give me, a little bit of background on kind of like how you were cultivated to actually sort of represent this crown, right? Because I feel like a lot of us, in the Black and Brown community, we call ourselves kings and queens, which is great, but there's a you have to live up to that, right? You have to earn this crown, and we have to pass on and lead the way our ancestors did for us. And so how has your family and your ancestors and the folks that have been in your family supported, cultivated, and sort of nurtured this season in your life, and working and connecting with the community?
So I mean, my family has always been rooted in community and the Black agenda. That's just a real word, right? And so my dad passed 20 years ago, but his name was Leon Nelson, and he was the founder of the Greater Roxbury Chamber of Commerce. The Greater Roxbury Chamber of Commerce, its primary focus and mission was to cultivate and nurture Black business in Greater Boston, particularly the Grove Hall and Roxbury, Dorchester areas, but certainly Greater Boston, and really begin to promote and uplift up and coming talent, right? So it was really his goal to promote. If Jay was first coming into Emerson and in this role that you're playing now, Jay would be one to watch, right? He formed something called the 100 Black listing. So before some of these other listings were in play, and I'm not knocking them, I think they all serve a purpose. My dad had formed something with others. I mean, it wasn't just him. Others had concepts, and others had actually produced. But a while back, that highlighted Black leaders in the industry, right? And so the goal was to do this listing where people, black black community could connect to these persons. A Jay Williams would be one of those persons on the list that you could connect with, and would do a short bio about you and really how to continue to support or to meet with or to collaborate with Jay, right? And so it was called the 100 Black Listing. It was published for a number of years. That was his foundation, and he always instilled in me that's, you find the way to give back. You find the way to connect our people so we could continue the journey forward. His focus was economic development, small business development. And so that's how he contributed, right? My mom, in a similar space, looked at it through the civil rights rules. So she had long-standing history with the NAACP, not only locally, but certainly on a regional level, and used that as her platform to give back. So my dad's focus was economic development and unity within community, right? My mom's focus, and both of them became civil rights people. My father later on joined the NAACP and actually served in one of the highest positions as the director of national security for the entire organization. My mom served in different capacities of leadership with the Boston branch, but then also served as a regional director, as the regional New England Area Conference president for a number of years. My mother's take was a little different. My mother's take was more towards cultivating the future leadership, so succession planning, right? So how do you begin to identify young and upcoming young adults that could lead and serve not only within the organization, but then would go on to really continue to move the needle forward around race matters, right? And so that's how they came together. So I use that with a number of other people. Again, Jay, like I could name you a list of people, right? But the point being, I was privileged to watch them, right? I was privileged to watch them come together every Sunday. At that time, I was much younger, right? But really, I wasn't even 10 years old yet, but they would do what was called a leadership meeting every Sunday, Jay. So at that time, on Mass Ave, there was something called the Public Businessmen's Club. And the Public Businessmen's Club was actually one of those brown houses, right, on Mass Ave. They're like it's like an alcove on one side of Mass Ave now, close to Mita and New York Pizza, that block, right, of Mass Ave, right? And so it was a townhouse that they had all come together. Black businessmen had purchased, and they would do meetings every Sunday, Jay, every Sunday night, and they would chart out every sector of industry and business and community. And it was a wall, right? Like I'm a strategist, right? I think I shared this with you. I love being in the background. I just like wall writing and putting pieces together, right? They would have it laid out for everything that we're talking about now. And it was a story of connecting the dots. It was a story of, okay, so Jay, you are more connected to such and such. So you would have this initial conversation to begin to build out how we not only, now it's going to get crazy, it's going to sound funny, but infiltrate, but take over that industry, right? Here I am, or community, right? It would be the same concept for politics, like who's coming next, who can we nurture, who can we develop? We need to consider the seats in the House and the Senate and on city level and city council, all of these things. And they did it, Jay, every Sunday.
So it's very intentional. It's very strategic.
Man, listen.
They had a plan.
Listen, yeah. And what I will share with you, I'm sure that there are pockets of that exist now. In fact, I've heard of different people kind of doing that. But the unity amongst what they were doing back then was so different. Lisa Guscott, who's like my big sister, right? Lisa Guscott could probably share some stories with you because she was part of that space. We were both younger. She was actually babysitting me then. It's too funny. But that's what happened. And so I'm hopeful that, as we are in this very unique and interesting time, certainly not a time that's foreign to Black experience, but where we have this opportunity, right, to consider borrowing from parts of history, specifically Boston history, right? I'm not knocking the nation, but if we're like Boston's history of Blackness, that space would come forth, right? Because it was also a place for Jay. If I had an issue with you and you and I are both Black leaders, then that space would be a space that we would be asked to come to. And we would be asked to come to because the goal was to resolve the issues, right? And so that we could still be aligned with the overarching theme, which would be to move the Black agenda forward.
Mm-hmm. And so so it's clear that you have been groomed for this work since you were little. How important is it for our sisters to be in leadership roles and positions of power during this dual pandemic? All right, because when there's a lot of conversation swirling that when folks consider Black Lives Matter, it's more leans more towards Black men, supporting and acknowledging Black men, when Black women are the most vulnerable population in all of this, right? And so how important is it for you as a Black woman being in a leadership role in politics for you to look across the table and to see another Black woman, in a leadership role, doing this work and representing and being or amplifying the voices of the community?
I mean, I think it's critical, right? Because what I will say is that, number one, just by way of how historically politics have been played out in the city, right? You don't see a lot of Black women in leadership here, right? You see pockets of it. It's almost like they're waves, right? And so when you see another Black woman at the table, and one who recognizes that we are in this for the common good, right? The common space of our agenda moving forward, but also to ensure that there's gender balance as it relates to matters and issues concerning us, right? Because the other piece is Black women in leadership. There have been times when others would speak for us, right? Even with us in the room. That's another thing to unpack at another time, right? But the reality is now that you have the opportunity to have Black women representing different sectors at the table and speaking for women, it's a wonderful thing. And it's something that I'm hopeful that will continue to move and develop as we move forward and as we move through these dual pandemics. There's so much brilliance in this city, right? There's so many men and women, but certainly Black women who have, like me, been in the background, right? So I'll be honest with you, there's some that are very much more forward facing. I actually like the strategic work. Like it helped. Like I'm a strategist, but there are others who really like the forefront. Prayerfully not for selfish gain, but to really move the agenda forward. And so when you have that balance at a table, I believe those are some of the best tables to sit at, because you will literally get to a space of moving an agenda forward. And this is not to take away from our brothers or anyone else for that matter. I'm just saying at the end of the day, that combination of strong Black women leadership and Black male leadership at a table, particularly at these times, Jay, when we're talking about racism, when we're talking about where everyone is suggesting that cities across the nation are shifting, right? It's a slow shift, but we're looking at policy, we're looking at ways that this will impact the future, your children, my son, others, right? This is a crucial time. And so we have to be at the table. And we have to be at a table where we are promoting the agenda for our people. That's just how I see it.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And because you're behind the scenes and really focus on strategy, what are some of the things, whether it's policies or new legislations or new initiatives that are happening behind the scenes that the Black community is unaware of, that they should be aware of? And how can we first be aware of it, and then how can we support you or it so that it impacts us in our community in a positive way?
Yeah, I think certainly policy is always key,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because policy is it's the insider outsider game, right? So, and I don't mean to simplify it by saying it as a game. I'm saying there's a strategy to have people on the inside of any institution that you're trying to change, or an institution that has the authority to shape people, right, and the communities we serve, right? So let's be clear, right? So you have to have persons on the inside who recognize that until we all eat at that same table, Jay, we still have to fight. And so that's your insider person, those insider persons. And then your external persons are the persons who advocate, the persons who pick apart and look at what has been, what could be, and what should be, and help to support what we're trying to move forward. So for us right now, there have been a couple of things. The announcement of public health being a race, a race crisis, right? A crisis in the city of Boston. And so how are the Jays and our Miss Sylvias and others looking at what has been written, what has been proposed, what has been said, what you might have read in newspaper articles or other ways that you get your news that enforce what some of those priorities are within the public health space, just by way of example, right? By way of policies overall, right?
Mm-hmm.
The public record space of executive orders and spaces where people can look and see as it relates to Black and Brown people and our movement within city government or beyond, have people actually done what they said they were going to do, right? So there are different ways to look at the accountability measure of what we're doing. This office specifically is big on dialogues, both internal and external, part of the executive order that we put forward that helps to really begin to move the needle forward. It's a culture shift, right? So historically, the city of Boston has had a public and almost iconic history when it relates to race matters, right? And so now we have this unique opportunity to begin to really make some changes that stem from different leadership in the city. My colleagues here have done tremendous work and continue to build. I mean, it's a learning stage, right? We are a work in progress, right? And so how do people hold not only us accountable, but what has been said from the administration concerning us, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's dialogues, right? There's this anticipation of deeper trainings that will deal with cultural awareness and biases and sensitivities. There's always the policy space, Jay, and that is so key, because the policy actually dictates how you and I eat, live, breathe,
Mm-hmm.
and strive in a city, in this city called Boston. And so because this leadership has said that they are committed to this very deep-rooted change, right? The systemic issue that is at hand. How do we hold everybody accountable, myself included, right? I'm not exempt because I'm part of this institution. You understand what I'm saying to you? But that's how we can look forward. I think the other piece, and I will say this, right, because you and I have talked about movement before, but I think something has shifted, right? So let's be clear. What happened was, in the midst of a dual pandemic, at the heightened time of Brother Lloyd being publicly, his public witness of him being murdered and others, right? There was this huge cry. And I'm gonna use this word not to simplify, but there was a certain level of noise that penetrated and caused for those who don't look like us to actually stand still. I mean, it was a universal cry out across the nation, right? Unrest across the nation, peaceful protests, some not as peaceful, but the common goal was around reform, justice, and we are tired, right, Jay? As a Black man, you are tired of seeing your brothers being killed, tired of seeing your brothers pulled over, tired of seeing your sisters. I mean, just name it, right? So it was a public cry that was loud and urgent and necessary. And what I can share with you is that the noise has subsided a little. Hear me. I'm not saying the noise doesn't exist still. I'm just saying the noise isn't as loud. And so when the noise begins to simmer, for some, they believe that they can go back to business as usual. Just hear me there, right? So here's where we are. Not necessarily saying this administration. I'm just saying now I'm looking at the entire national stage, right? Where people are now back to the pandemic within the pandemic. So COVID, although very necessary, becomes the number one focus. So for a few weeks in the heightened time of where we were coming out and crying out as Black people, it was a dual urgency. Just hear me, Jay. It was COVID and racial injustice or unrest, right? Okay. We're now back to COVID. I'm not simplifying COVID. In fact, COVID has unearthed the disparities amongst Black and Brown people as it relates to healthcare systems, health inequities, the whole nine. So I'm not taking away from COVID. My hope and prayer is that from COVID round one, Black and Brown community will understand the urgency of us demanding things so that we can live, right? And so the administration has done a very good job with that as it relates to the public health space and moving that forward with the community input and community impact and community voice. But what I'm sharing with you is that at one point, the dual pandemic was top of mind.
Mm-hmm. Now it's a singular.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I'm not saying that people aren't still thinking about it. That would be wrong, right? I haven't done a survey, but what I'm saying is there was a short window in time where these dual pandemics made everyone stop.
Mm. Mm.
And there was a slight movement where police reform became one of the top priorities. If you remember now, all of a sudden, cities and states alike are looking at how to reform and looking at how to rebrand and looking into different ways to look at budgets. Think about what happened, right? Okay. And then look at us today.
Right. And it's interesting because when you talk, you think it's been like years. We're talking about a matter of weeks and months. Like it hasn't been that, like COVID hasn't, when you look at the grand scheme of time, COVID hasn't affected us for that long. And it was just
exactly.
We're talking about, we'll say end of February, early March is when like as a nation, things started shutting down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, you had that uptick in the movement. And we'll say we'll had a good maybe 7-week run. And now, like you said, the noise is, and that when you just look at time, 6-7 weeks, that's nothing. That's nothing. That's nothing.
Nope.
I think that speaks to, a lot of what the premise of this podcast is, this idea of panic and patience, right? This sense of urgency. And is this like, we don't wait for more, but we also understand that things take time, but we don't want to wait. We've been waiting, we've been tired, we've been wanting this work. And so how do we continue the work that you're doing when you understand that you may not even be the one that receives the fruit from your labor? It may be for your son, it may be for your grandkids, right? But
how about that? Yep.
But we still have to do this work, and the noise or lack thereof is going to be the catalyst to help make that happen. If we're not making no noise anymore, then this is going to be longer and longer and longer. And so, I'm interested to see how we sort of regroup with that understanding that we cannot rest. Things haven't changed enough for us to be like, okay, we're good now. We got our murals, right? We got our t-shirts, we got our profile pictures up. We good now. And in fact, that's really only the beginning. It's not the end. It's really only the beginning. And I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah. I just want to say one thing, Jay. So let me clarify just a little bit. There's certain industries or sectors where the noise has continued, right? So it is transformed into a different type of collaborative type of action or noise but it's not the universal noise, right? So when everybody was in this unrest, right, where people were being very transparent about their feelings and what this has meant to them, right? Both personally, both historically, or to your point around community and family, like that was a universal noise. It was just a different noise. And
Yeah.
so now, and I'm not taking away from either part of it, right? I'm just saying that some of that universal has simmered. And whereas within industry sectors, like for example here in Boston, certainly economic growth, economic engines, the economic space of how Black and Brown business will thrive through a COVID pandemic, but also in recognizing the inequities that we are aware of. You know, that noise has shifted, right? So it's not that the noise has simmered per se, it's just shifted a little bit. That's one industry, right?
Yeah.
We are dealing with an entire community which has different industries to bear. And again, what I'm saying is that at one point, that universal noise, which is good noise, not
Mm-hmm.
bad, right? Was good trouble, right?
Good trouble,
With
right?
right.
Right.
Giving respect to our late Congressman Lewis, right? That good trouble was universal and it was real loud.
Mm.
And now it seems to have shifted.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we got work to do. We
Yeah,
got
we do.
work to
Mm-hmm.
do. Lori,
Mm-hmm.
I want to thank you so, so much for your time, for your wisdom, for your candor in this conversation. You know, I've learned a lot. I have a different perspective and understanding about some things. Got a chance to get to know you better, and so I am
Mm-hmm.
grateful. I am grateful for you, and you know, I just want to let you know that I love you. I see
Oh,
you and you matter. You matter and your work matters. And thank you so much for all that you've done in the community and all that you continue to do. And I look forward to seeing what you got for us next, what this next chapter, what this next season, what this next initiative, because I know you are tirelessly working behind the scenes, making things happen. And I'm excited to see, you know, it come to fruition.
wow, that was so tight, Jay. You always know what to say. That was beautiful. I received that. I just want to say, you know, I'm excited about your journey as well. I'm just very grateful to be a short little small piece of it as we've come together to know each other. I'm excited about our partnership and what we will build, but I'm also excited about you and what you bring to the city, right, and what you bring to the nation. Um, it's brothers like you that really move things forward. And so your heart, your passion, and your commitment to not only us, to understanding and loving us and being in love with us as Black people, and how you actually portray that and showcase that daily is really why I rock with you, Jay. I mean, you just have it with you. And so I'm hopeful that however I can contribute to your journey, that you would allow me to, and that we'll build it together, man. We have much work to do, sir.
Yes,
So
we got
let's
some
just
good
get it
trouble to get
moving.
into together.
And that's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you so much. And congrats on the podcast, which I'm just in awe of. You're just doing damage. So I'm real proud of you. And thank you for giving me just a little bit to talk about.
Yeah.
And so we'll make it work. So thank you, sir.